Hello everyone, welcome to the Fingerprints podcast. We're your hosts,
Nicole
and Phoebe.
Today we would like to introduce you to our first guest, Emily. Would you mind telling us a bit about yourself?
Okay, so I'm Emily. I live in Oxford. I've lived here on and off since I came here as a student when I was 18, and I work as a teacher. I've worked in a number of different schools, both locally and internationally. I teach biology. I love sport, and I fill my time by doing lots of crazy creative projects.
Lovely. So, what's your story?
So the story that I'm going to talk to you about today is some of the travels that I have been on, because if you look at my CV, then what you see is I have a pattern of being in a place for a while and then going on a little adventure. So I'm going to tell you about some of those adventures. So one of my first adventures was when I finished university. I graduated and I hadn't really got a plan, because my plan was to go and row at the Olympics, which was a bad plan. And so after a while I did a few jobs, and then I was offered the opportunity to go and work at an international school in Pakistan, which I accepted and was really interesting and kind of very different from anything I'd done before. So I was working there as an assistant teacher, helping some of the boys. It was a boys' school, helping the boys improve their English and doing a little bit of biology tuition to the GCSE and A-level students. But one of my memories was after I'd been there for about 3 weeks, the head teacher said, would I be interested in going on a expedition up into the mountains, so up into the Himalayas, to do a navigation course with the kids. And I was like, absolutely, because those are all things that I love. And I was going with this other teacher. I can't even remember his name, which is bad when we get to the later part of the story. Anyway, so we head off to this centre, and it's like, a kind of outward bound centre, Pakistani style. But there's only one staff room. Now, obviously, they weren't expecting, a woman going to these places is not very normal. So I get the staff room, and so the male teacher has to sleep with the boys. After a couple of days, we're sort of getting to know each other, like me with the kids and also with this guy. He says, would I like to come and have dinner with him that evening? Now, I took this to be that he was, fed up with sharing room with the boys and spending all of his time with them, and it would be nice to go out into the town. So I was like, yeah, sure. Didn't really think too much about it. Then a little bit later, he said, don't tell the boys that we're going out for dinner. I was like, uh-oh, this isn't cool. And then I realised I was on a date that I didn't want to be on. So we're chatting, and I'm thinking, well, the best thing for me to do is if I just talk a lot, then it's going to be less awkward, because he can't tell me anything that I don't want to hear. So I'm sort of jabbering away, and we're getting through the meal, and we had fajitas, and that's what I remember about this meal. I ate fajitas, and every time I eat fajitas, I think about this story. So, so I finished my fajitas, and I'm thinking, oh, please, this must nearly be over. And then he says to me, so I brought you here today because in your culture, when a man likes a woman, he asks her out to dinner. And I'm like, oh no. And I was like, oh dear, what do I do with this? So I'm like, I'm going to go for the old faithful. I do the inventor boyfriend. So I was like, oh, well, that's funny. My boyfriend, da 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 da. My boyfriend, da 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 da. Anyway, so then he says, so, tell me about this boyfriend of yours. Are you going to marry him? And I was like, no, I'm not going to marry this one. Anyway, this just gets progressively more awkward. And he then essentially propositions me and says that, would I consider being his wife, and it would be okay. He wouldn't expect my father to pay any kind of dowry. Anyway, this was all supremely awkward. And we then went for a walk around the town. Like, I couldn't even just go straight back and run away. We then went, and he bought me a scarf. So there you go. That was that story. And then a later point in my life, I took a year out basically, and did some more travel, and I ended up in Kenya doing some community relief work there. I didn't get any marriage proposals there. In fact, that marriage proposal was the only marriage proposal I got in Pakistan. I ended up with 4. But there we are. Never had any since, but got 4 there. So in Kenya, I was doing slightly different work. So I wasn't attached to a school. It was a community project. And the way this worked is a charity. And we'd go out into lots of different local communities, incredibly rural area. Most places didn't have electricity, running water, or sanitation really. Some of them had drop toilets, but that was kind of it. And we'd go out into the communities and do various different things. So I was involved in some projects helping with education around kind of reducing malaria risk. So that involved going to different households, walking them around their houses and showing them how they could do things to help to reduce the risk of malaria. So things like not having buckets full of water so that the mosquitoes can't breed, having mosquito nets, things like that. The big issue in that area was HIV. And so also going and kind of trying to educate people about the risks of HIV. We did quite a lot of work with orphan families, so where both parents had died from HIV. The kids hadn't necessarily been tested, but we could make an assumption that they probably were positive, and trying to help them to be able to make enough money to survive and have food, but also for some of them to be able to go to school. So we'd help them, give them seed to grow produce so that they could then sell that at the market, and they could use that money to pay for some of the kids to go to school. And things like that. I did go into a local school and I did some sex ed in the local school to help them, again, sort of to do with HIV awareness really. And then there was one community that was really interesting. So it was, this one was really, really remote. I mean, all of them were remote, but this one is like an hour in a 4x4 trying to go down these tracks. And it was, because it was so remote, it was quite a closed community. And so it's unusually for that area, there were a lot of people with physical disabilities, and there were a lot of people with albinism. And there are huge kind of cultural stereotypes with this. And so we were doing lots of work, working with these people, teaching, there was a whole group who couldn't speak or were deaf. And so teaching them sign language and learning Kenyan sign language, that was an interesting experience. Providing sunscreen for the albino people, because obviously, you know, that's not something that is really required in Kenya, but they very much needed it. And just the whole kind of premise of all of these projects was that anything that we did, we had to make sure was sustainable. So it wasn't just a case of coming in as, you know, wealthy Westerners and just chucking money at the problem. Anything we did had to be able to persist after we left. So there had to be a way of it then we could provide the seed money. So for example, I bought 100 mosquito nets, but then there had to be a way of replenishing those mosquito nets. So it was kind of like that was really interesting from a point of view of really trying to understand how you can make small scale impact, but then make it retain and keep going. I think probably one of the hardest projects that I was involved in was a sort of palliative care project where we walked around with paracetamol, cough medicine and an antihistamine, and we were going and visiting people who were very, very sick, but they kind of believed that we could help them, which we really couldn't help them at all, but that was really difficult to see. There we go.
Amazing.
Some
Let's go into some Q&A. I would like to know, since you've experienced so many travel experiences and cultures, what is one experience or one challenge that you've overcome that reminds you of your strength every day?
Wow. I mean, I think probably in truth that would not necessarily come from my travels, but from some of the stuff that I did at university.
Meeting deadlines?
No, I mean to do with sport actually, and to do with some of the challenges that I overcame in the rowing that I did, and I think that's really built a lot of who I am today.
Okay. Then more related to the culture aspect because it's more relevant. What do you think that people all across the globe or what have you found is a common trace that people have, even though you have experienced so many different cultures everywhere? What is something that people...
I think all people can show kindness.
Oh, okay.
And I think in every, I've told you stories about Pakistan and Kenya, but I spent a couple of years in Malaysia and have travelled widely around in that part of the world as well. And I think that you see kindness everywhere that you go. You see cruelty as well.
Yeah.
But let's focus on the positives. And even in an area where, these communities where these people had nothing, they gave so much of themselves to you. And I mean, that was really, really humbling. So when I was then leaving to go home, the communities that I'd worked most closely with, they kind of held parties to say goodbye to me, and they would feed us. So they'd feed us chicken and give us cloth. And it's, it was incredible because it was stuff that they didn't have, and it meant they really wanted to show their kindness. But for me, that was just incredibly humbling because they really had nothing, and relatively I had the world. And it was that is something that, when I sort of think about things, I think if people in those situations who have nothing can show such kindness and such kind of grace, I suppose, then we can all do that.
So now, when you think about these stories, when you talk about them, do you wish you could go back and relive them? Relive that time?
Well, would I like to go back to being in my mid-20s? Yeah, probably. But I think, people say never go back, and I think it's always difficult when you return to something that you have really fond memories of, because it's never quite how you remember it. And what I try and do is I try and take the positive things that I learned from one experience and carry it into the next one. But yeah, I have had times when I've really thought about going back into those sorts of environments and working more seriously. And in fact, at one point I very nearly went and did, I applied to VSO, who are a organisation that do sort of more like work placements in those sorts of areas, but weirdly just in that year they didn't have placements that fitted my sort of skill set for what I wanted to do, and so I ended up getting a job in an international school instead. So it's, that was one of those sliding doors moments, I suppose, in life. But so yeah, it is something I've thought about, just because it's it's a very different type of work.
Okay. What would you like to say to people who are also thinking about traveling to places that you've been?
Do it. Travels,
Yes.
travel, I don't think there is a greater privilege, really, to be able to go and to experience different cultures and different places. I mean, I've done lots of different, when I was 18, we did a, interrailing around Europe, 20 cities in 30 days or whatever it was, whistle-stop tour, which is one type of travel. Then I've done go and stay in a place for a longer period of time and really get to know it. That's actually the kind of stuff I prefer, I suppose. And when I go to places, I tend to just walk. I just walk and walk around the place, and I just think that's a nice way of seeing a different place. But I think traveling and going and seeing different places, and it pushes your boundaries. It makes you see things through a different lens. It gives you experiences that you can't get from any other place. So yeah, I think travel is the greatest gift that we can have, if you can do it in a sustainable type of not flying everywhere fashion, which of course you can't. So
yeah. Throughout the travels you also volunteered. So what does volunteering mean to you, and why do you think it's so important?
That's a good question. I think we're all in a pretty privileged position in terms of our lifestyles, and I think that you give something, but you gain an awful lot as well. So it's that I don't think volunteering is ever truly altruistic, because I think you get quite a lot from it as well. But I think for me, what has it given me? It's given me experiences that I couldn't possibly have had in other ways, which have then shaped me and shaped my values. And I think that you can learn that from a very, very early age. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to go and volunteer in the middle of nowhere in a challenging country. Just going and helping the old lady down the street with her groceries, it's the same thing. I think just just learning to help. I think that kind of, we need a better sense of community, I think, in society, and volunteering helps to generate that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Since you mentioned values just now, I was wondering, do some of the values that you've acquired during your travel, have they influenced your teaching in any way?
Ooh. I think I suppose it's about trying to project. If you're a teacher, you have lots of roles. You have a role of providing information, but you also have a role of being kind of like a bit of a role model, I suppose.
Definitely.
And so I think it's about trying to show my students that there are other ways of being, and other people, and a different side of things. I know when I first came back from Kenya, I was quite forceful with some of the kids I was teaching then about their privilege and how they needed to maybe think a little bit beyond the end of their own noses. But I think it's kind of our responsibility as well as teachers to try and open up the world to the students that we teach.
So, do you think teaching at an international school is a unique experience?
Yeah, I mean, I love teaching at an international school. I think when I came home from Malaysia and I went back into just a British school, I really missed the internationalism.
Okay.
I think St Clair's is particularly unique because you can work in a school that is an international school by, I can just go to a different country.
Yeah.
But what you normally find is there is one or two nationalities that have dominance, and then there are a couple of others, a smattering of others. I think what makes St Clair's so unique is, whilst we do have some nationalities that have larger numbers, we've got 42 different nationalities at the college at the moment. And so it is truly international.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes this place so incredibly special.
That's really beautiful.
It is.
Would you travel again to go and volunteer somewhere? Where would you go if you could do it again?
Oh man, where would I go?
Yeah.
My bucket list is
Or
very,
would
very
you?
long.
Where wouldn't you?
I think, yes, I would. I think what I find interesting is just, personally, as I get older, there's something that makes me more nervous isn't the right way, but less kind of gung-ho about upping sticks and leaving.
Mm-hmm.
I guess, I've got a nice job in a nice school, in a nice city, I've got a nice life. It's kind of, the more rooted you become, the harder it is just to go, because I could go and teach, I could do this job anywhere. So it's harder to sort of uproot yourself. But obviously we still have holidays. So
Exactly.
there are a million places that I would like to go. I've never been to India, which is a massive place. Obviously that I've been to Pakistan, I've been to Sri Lanka, but I've never been to India. So that's very much on the list. South America is somewhere I've travelled in very little, hardly at all. Costa Rica is very, very high up on my list. I mean, I could go on for hours about all of the places I want to go to.
Yeah.
I do like doing kind of volunteering work. I think it's the thing that you have to be a bit wary of these days is there's a business around volunteering.
Yeah.
Particularly like the gap year business. And those aren't always sustainable or particularly meaningful. So it's about trying to find the right sorts of projects. And I think sometimes you find them by going to a place, and you go to a place and you hang around in a community, and then you find need rather than maybe doing an organised. But that's harder to then, you don't quite know where you're going to end up.
So talking about the right projects, what's one world issue or something that you can't go without in your lifetime contributing to or solving?
Oh man, there are so many.
One you're most passionate about. What's one thing I have to do something to contribute to solve this issue? Something that keeps you up at night.
I think I think perhaps the one that applies most readily across the entire globe is equality. And I mean that from many aspects. I think obviously, we're three women sat having a lovely conversation. I think there's that side of equality. I think there's also equality regarding sexuality as well. And I think we've got a long way to go.
Thank you very much, Emily. It
You're
was
very welcome.
extremely interesting. We're happy to have you on our podcast as our first guest.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
See you soon!
Fingerprints, a podcast embracing uniqueness, featuring real people and real stories.